All right, class, good afternoon. How are you? Good, good. Welcome. This is Introduction to Psychology. I am Dr. Ross. How was your break?
That's okay.
Anybody go out of town? Any travel? Okay. All right. But how I think we'll start the class off is do some brief introductions. I'll have you introduce yourself. I'll tell you a little bit about myself. We will go over the syllabus so we know what to expect for the whole semester. And then we'll kind of get into chapter 1 and talk about psychology, the root of it, right? And, things we could do with the field and whatnot. So what do I want to learn? Tell me your whole name, first and last, what year you are, and what's your major if you picked one, and what do you hope to get from the class. So we'll start here.
My name is Priscilla. I'm a freshman. My major is nursing. What I hope to get from the class is to learn more about psychology and how it works.
Okay, excellent. So with nursing, you'll also take developmental psychology as like a requirement. So you're having it probably again at some point. Yes.
My name is Priscilla, and I'm a freshman, and I'm studying for health studies. And what I want to get out of this course is to broaden my understanding on the human mind.
Okay. Welcome.
Hi, my name is Kaylee Rodriguez. I'm a freshman. My major is in nursing, and I'm not sure yet what I want to come out of this class.
Okay. Fair enough.
My name is Toriano Williams. I'm a freshman, first year. I never took psychology class, so I'm actually very interested to see what psychology is all about.
Okay. All right. Welcome. Kind of sure you did. Okay. Representing Chicago. You Bears fan?
Me?
Yes.
My name is Lorelai Delaney. It's my first year, and I'm going to be majoring in legal studies. So I think this class is like a good branch to what I want to go into.
All right. So you want to become a lawyer?
No, I want to do the forensic side.
Okay.
I want to go into criminology.
Okay.
Yeah.
We also do forensic psychology too. Right? Call you on the stand. All right.
My name is Tanya Miranda. I'm a first year. My major is criminology, and one thing I want to get out of this class is like learning things. I'm taking psychology.
What do you hope to do with criminology?
I want to be either law enforcement or a lawyer.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Malia. My major is nursing, but I want to become a pediatrician. What was that question?
What do you hope to get from the course?
To learn more about the human brain, which is what psychology is. Just have a more understanding of it. And yeah, I'm excited about this class.
All right. Excellent. Welcome. All right, everyone. I am Dr. Ross. I started off in business, right? So I'll just kind of give you backstory. I started off in the world of business, worked in marketing, then I worked in real estate, used to be a broker here in Chicago. I worked in the Gold Coast and Lincoln Park area, selling homes and condos and things like that. Beyond that, I became a real estate investor, so I started buying properties. And then beyond that, I went overseas to invest, buy properties, and small startup companies too. So kind of describe it as private equity, venture capital, a little bit of business consulting, and real estate investment. That was the beginning. Beyond that, right? Made a little money, and I said, well, what can I do to help others? And I started a philanthropic organization to help people around the world build up education programs, mental health programs, culture exchange programs. So I started my own not-for-profit organization. Right? Primarily, I do a lot of work in South Africa, even with the not-for-profit, so I spend a lot of money there, help them build up impoverished areas, things and beyond that. Okay, after business, after the world of business. So I was interacting with a lot of different cultures, people from different government systems, right? Not-for-profit organizations, professionals in for-profit field, right? And I became vastly interested on trying to help and serve people overcome issues, right? Within their communities or with the governments, or in their just neighborhoods, families, cultural groups. So I'm what's known as an international psychologist, right? So I help sort of bridge the gap that's there between, say, a lot of Eastern thoughts of psychology, right? Which really doesn't even include a lot of things we'll talk about. And the Western perspectives, right? Of therapy, intervention, helping people overcome issues, right? So I work with governments, I work with organizations, and I work with communities, groups, individuals, right? And so that is my background. Now, on a personal kind of note, I'm from Chicago. Mom is African American from Mississippi, southern Mississippi. Dad is Italian from Sicily. Dad had an interesting background. He was in the Sicilian mafia, the Italian mafia, for the most part. So I had a lot of interesting experiences with him. But I grew up with very open-minded parents. Right? They got together. They could care less, I guess, what society thought. Right? It was back then kind of unusual for Italian man, African American female to get together. So I also come from a very diverse, multicultural background. So I kind of felt like it led me to where I am now, right? Beyond that, I was born in Cabrini Green here in Chicago, which used to be a very big housing project. And I went to 13 elementary schools. We moved around a lot. You know, sometimes we were in, kind of extreme poverty situations when we grew up poor, right? But then I'm like, well, I think it all kind of makes sense now. It all supposed to work out the way it's supposed to work out, right? So I've had a lot of different experiences, and I think that all kind of relates to where I am now. I teach both business and psychology. So I teach the Brigham School of Business at Dominican. I teach in the psych department, and then I teach for Pepperdine, which is Malibu, California. I teach their online psych programs. Right? I'm always questioning myself, like, why am I here in Chicago when they can just offer me to go live in Malibu? Right? Well, what am I doing here? But I have 2 small kids. My son Christian, who is 6, my daughter Chloe, who's 4. I got a Pomsky dog. If you've never seen a Pomsky, it's a Pomeranian mixed with a Siberian Husky. So Google it. It's a very interesting looking dog. The dog didn't exist before 2011, right? That breed. And what else I'm into? Motorcycles, sailing, hiking, mountain climbing, like adventurous stuff, things like that. So that's kind of my background. Any questions? All right. Okay, so I think what we should do first is go through the syllabus. So we see everything we have to look forward to in the course, right? So there's no stone unturned there. So let's see. Okay, all right, so the textbook, right? The textbook here is Kuhn and Mitterer, right? We're looking at Intro to Psych, Gateways to Mind and Behavior, the 13th edition. Why did I pick this book? Because you could go on Cengage Learning and create a free account, and you can access the book, right, free. You all probably find a PDF online for free, right? You'll go find a PDF. It's available because it's the older version. They have more newer versions, but I felt like this one was relevant enough to kind of discuss everything I don't think we should, and easy enough to access for everybody. All right, beyond that, 2 exams, midterm and final. The midterm will usually be the first 8 chapters we'll go through. Final will be cumulative, right? It'll encompass everything we learn in the course. The university kind of requires that, so it's not really my choosing for the final exams, right? So yes, 2 exams. I don't think we're gonna have any quizzes, it's not up here, but we may have something else in between, but I'll let you know. Attendance and in-class participation is important. We have a relatively smaller class here, so I want everybody here, right? Each class, right? Teach a good, healthy learning environment. So yes, no missing class unless you have a valid excuse. All right, research participation, right? The university also likes students to participate in some kind of psychological research. So a couple ways you could do it. The easiest way is just go on SONA, which is on Dominican's website, and you can go into this portal, you'll create an account, free, and it'll list all sorts of research that the school is doing, right? Different people in different departments, but primarily psychology department. From there, you can just select some research to be part of, a questionnaire, a survey, something of the sort, and you'll get credit for it, right? What you'll do is write up kind of a summary of what the research was about, what was your kind of reason for being in it, right? As a participant, yes, and that'll be it for research participation. And then discussion, right? We get 10 discussion posts that we'll do throughout the term. They're worth 10 points each. What I would like is one initial reply to the question, and then maybe one initial response to the question, and then reply to maybe someone else. Look at your other colleagues and see what they're talking about, and agree, disagree, or have something to add to what they've already stated. All right, and then presentations, right? Presentations. All right, our presentations will be individual. We'll have individual presentations. You could choose any psych-related topic, anything, right? You could talk about maybe issues in high school, right? The social environment or behaviors or something there, mental processes and that. You could talk about things like family, personal life, romantic life. You could talk about other issues, maybe pick a particular kind of cohort or demographic, like children or challenges that older people go through, midlife crisis, teenagers, and something specific that you could pick, right? And then you'll present in class with your presentation. I kind of listed out all of the requirements for that.
When is this? Or you just explaining it?
Yeah, I'm just explaining it. I haven't put the date. I'll let you know. You know, the presentations will probably start the last half of the semester, right? We got 7 people, so we figure maybe after midterm, every week, a new person will present. I think we'll kind of do that, right? And then we'll have other kind of individual or group class discussions, and I would say more so discussions, not necessarily assignments, but maybe questions I'll ask you, and maybe you could talk amongst each other. And so maybe we'll just do 3 groups. You 3 could be a group, you 2 could be a group, and you 2 group, for the rest of the semester, right?
That's fine.
Okay, so there's a question I'm asking you, talk amongst each other, your experiences, your thoughts, and then we'll all share with the class moving forward. Any questions? Pretty straightforward? All right.
There's nothing on your calendar besides an assignment, is that correct? There's nothing on your calendar besides an assignment, is that correct?
Right now? You saying there's something on campus?
Yeah, I'm trying to still look at the presentation that you're sharing.
Yeah, I still gotta upload a lot of stuff to campus.
Okay.
So the only thing on campus right now is the syllabus and the first discussion post, right? Yeah, and so I'll add more along the way, right? I'll add our presentation and the different discussions and all of that. So everything will be done on campus, including midterm and final, right? Everything is will be done there. Okay. Okay. So we'll talk about the field of psychology. So let me ask you, what comes to mind when you think of psychology? Raise your hand. What do you think is involved with psychology? Yes. All right. So a person think, hey, brain. Psychology is focused on the brain in some way. Anyone else? Yes.
Maybe like your behavior.
Like, hey, behaviors, right? Behavior is something that we can observe and measure. Unfortunately, none of us could read minds, so we can't study thoughts, right? But maybe we can study what you tell us about your thoughts, right? Yes?
We can study triggers from the brain, like what triggers the brain.
Okay.
Cause it to do what it does.
Okay, we could say, hey, triggers are maybe sensitivities,
Okay.
right? Well, right, we're like, we all have different sensitivities about different things. Temperature, right? Words, experiences, environments, something of the sort. What else? Psychology, what comes to mind? Right? It's so much more. Right? I think I went into this field because I think it's the most important field of all fields. Because it really involves you. It involves self. Right? You yourself are probably a mystery to yourself. Think about it. You have an unconscious mind. You have an alien, in essence. You have an alien living inside you. Right? Put it that way. Some would say it's a lizard brain, some sort of ancient brain, primarily just built only for survival. It doesn't care about creative thinking, doesn't really care too much about logic, but there are things that it does care about, and it primarily just cares for survival. So how do we know this? Everyone right now is doing something, shifting in the chair, touching their face, doing something unconsciously. You're not putting too much thought into it. It's doing it on its own. Whether you like, tapping your finger, tapping your feet, like, who's doing that? That alien, okay? Or what we would say, simply the unconscious mind. There's an unconscious mind built for adaptation and survival. Maybe it has nothing to do with your conscious, logical, rational thinking part of it, right? So it's interesting, like, well, in essence, there's maybe more than one you inside of you, whether you acknowledge it or not, right? The second part is some other things. You're like, well, you know what? I wouldn't do that if I were you. I think that's right or wrong. I think that's bad. I think that's good. I think it's great. You're like, well, who came up with that? There may be a moral self inside of you. Something you're like, I don't know. It just feels wrong. Right? I think that person, those people over there are wrong. What they're doing is wrong. Like, how did you come to that conclusion? It just feels wrong. Or you might say, I don't know, my experience, the religion I live in, faith, something, right? But there's something else. There's some sort of mechanism happening that maybe is difficult to describe and explain. And then the final part, you're like, oh, okay, I made a choice, I made a decision, I did some logical thinking, some analysis, and I made it, I did an action, right? Maybe you say, all right, now you have a logical part of your brain. But it's even more. Like, hey, Dr. Ross, I am in a bad mood and I'm cranky. Like, interesting, I wonder how to do with hormones. What's your blood sugar level right now? Did you eat? You have something to eat, right? You're like, oh, wow, hormones can dictate behavior, right? How do we process information? Why does it take us so long to learn one thing versus the other? Like, oh, this one comes naturally, this one seems math. And I'm not good at math, or I'm struggling. Like, no, that's just an information processing thing, which we could discuss too. How we process information, how do we learn, how do we memorize? Right? And then we could get into more things like personality. Like, oh, I want to be able to predict people's behaviors. I don't know, I'm dating a psychopath, I think, right? Sociopath, a toxic person. They have attachment issues. We trauma bonded, right? All these sorts of things may deal with life experiences which create personality, right? So we can talk about a lot of that, as well as what do we do with the knowledge that we have in the field of psychology. What can we do with that, right? First and foremost, so for this chapter, this first chapter, right, we're going to talk about how it became a science, right? Maybe some scientific, non-scientific questions. Psychology is the science of person, mind, and brain. Psychology's history, and also looking ahead. That's what we'll cover in this first chapter. Okay, so let's start off. You're like, hey, the field of psychology, think of any field. Right? It has its own histories, it has its own kind of starting point before it became something that there was a consensus that everybody agreed that this sort of be a category of something that could be studied rigorously, even put into universities and high schools, education systems. So psychology comes primarily from philosophy, right? You say, with philosophy, there are some interesting questions there, right? How do we learn? Why do we think we do what we do? Why are we here? What is consciousness? There's no consensus on what consciousness is, right? We don't really understand what consciousness is. Is your life just a big recording? You're just taking in information constantly, it never stops until you die, right? And then you maybe act on those things that are happening. Nobody truly knows, right? But we can kind of describe some things within that. Right, so great philosophical minds begin to ask really interesting questions about human behavior, or maybe describe it. A huge philosopher, I don't know if any of you ever heard of him, was Friedrich Nietzsche. Anyone ever heard of Nietzsche? Anyone ever heard Nietzsche in high school? Okay. Nietzsche, German philosopher, one of the greatest, profoundly influential philosopher, asked many questions about human behavior and descriptions of it. Nietzsche's very popular because we still use some of his phrases, right, that he would use. He would say, what doesn't kill you only makes you stronger. Right? That's Nietzsche. Right? Nietzsche says there's a concept of something called angst, right, German word, which we kind of know now as anxiety. Nietzschean kind of thought, right? Some sort of tension behind us, some wire that we always feel jittery for, right? Expectation of a future event. All right, Nietzsche even came up with another concept called Übermensch in German, which means overcome man, which translated to Superman. So Nietzsche actually came up with the concept of Superman. He described it in a different way, which means really to overcome yourself, the person who overcomes self. Right, so Nietzsche has very profound thought. From there, around the same area in Europe, you say, then we start to get other individuals who might have been more in the medical field, such as Sigmund Freud, right? So Carl Jung, right, who was an associate of Freud, colleague, and others. And what they start to really dive into, primarily Freud, was to say, hey, you know what? I can look at human beings as a patient, just like any other medical practitioner or physician would. My patient has an illness or disease of the mind. I think I can cure their disease of the mind, right? So Freud would kind of basically say, well, I'm taking in a client, and there's kind of two major things I'm looking at. Maybe I'll say even. One, tell me about your background. that your past is really important to me to understand why you are the way you are and what issues you have based on the past. Primarily, he would say childhood was probably the most influential part of any issue that you have going on. Two, he would say that you've repressed it, that mainly that you've buried those experiences somewhere and they're bothering you, but it's not on your conscious mind. It's back in that unconscious mind we just talked about, that alien mind. And if you bury it, it doesn't mean it goes away. It means it's there permanently until you finally address it. Until you bring it to the conscious mind and tackle it in some way. It could be something with mom, dad, family, school, trauma, something that has happened. So Freud would say, hey, you know what I'm doing? I'm primarily concerned with the past and I'm concerned with dreams. Right? Freud says, hey, dreams are extremely important. It's when the mind is at rest and it processes all the information you took in. Remember we said, your eyes are kind of like recorders. You're recording 24 hours a day. There's stuff you didn't pay attention to, but it's there. I mean, I actually had, what's that picture back there? Anybody? I didn't even look at it. You probably passed it when you came in the room. The mind still recorded it. You're just unconscious of it, right? But Freud would say, I'm concerned with all that unconscious stuff that manifests itself in your dreams, which is fears, desires, and other things. And I want to analyze that. Freud will also say, hey, you know what? I want you to lay on that couch or sit in that chair, and I want you to talk for 50 minutes nonstop. Just tell me everything that's on your mind. Everything that's on your mind. Freud says, I'm not going to even look at you. I'm going to sit behind you in some way, and I'm just going to take notes. And you're like, well, what are you looking for, Freud? I want to look up for patterns. Look up for themes. I want to look up for a time that you pause on something. I want to look at a time you skip something. Like, let's talk about something. Freud said that's even more important than anything you said. In fact, if you pause or you skip something, there's something there, buried in unconscious, right? That you've repressed these things. And I'm going to come up with solutions for all of that. So Freud is highly profound, very controversial, right? Very, very controversial person. I love Freud. I think Freud is awesome. Carl Jung, his affiliate, took it even beyond. Right? Carl Jung came up with the concept of archetypes. Anyone ever heard of archetypes? Basically, say like groups, collective groups of people all over the world, and how they have a certain storyline to them, things that we all identify with. Hence why he's like, if we go to the movies, we kind of like a particular story, which is the hero that started from the bottom and overcame. Right? He's like, there's a hero myth, and every human being has this. He came up with other things too, like collective consciousness, how we all may have one consciousness to some degree. Synchronicities, how everything that happens in your life, and you're like, that's interesting. I think I thought of that same thought yesterday. Right? Was that a coincidence? Or was that a sign that the universe is sending me information that I should pay attention to? Or is it, oh, it's just a coincidence? Synchronicities, right? How we're all kind of connected in some way. All right, so from beyond that, the Europeans brought over to America this psychological kind of field of this science of psychology, right? And people like William James, which is really kind of our first American psychologist, kind of, analyzed Americans, opened up laboratories, and expanded the science here in the U.S., right? And then here we are. So to say, that was the late 1800s. We've had a ton of other psychologists come around, right? So we have different fields of psychology that different people kind of extracted from that thought. We have things like applied behavior analysis, which is kind of looks at systematic ways to change habits and behavior, modify positive reinforcement. We'll talk about that. We have people who are cultural psychologists, kind of the work that I do. People who are organizational psychologists, work with organizations to change productivity, make people love their job more, perform better, right? More satisfied and happy. We have clinical psychologists who diagnose and test people, right? Give someone sort of a clinical diagnosis for a clinical issue, or do testing like cognitive abilities and intelligence tests, things of that nature. We have developmental psychologists, which will help people just kind of get through certain issues they're having at a particular point in life, or maybe their whole life for that matter. Right? And then we have interventions, things that we use as tools to kind of help people, right? Usually evidence-based, supported with some sort of research and intervention. Thoughts, questions? Okay. All right, so what is psychology here? I think this is limited. Psychology is not just person, mind, and brain, right? Beyond that, we could say psychology is the study of mental life or mental processes in mental life, right? You have a mental life, which means that you have a lot of feelings, thoughts, behaviors that impact the way that your life unfolds, right? We have other things. You have your biological systems, which are extremely important too. You have deficiencies in something, chemical imbalance, hormones, how that's all impacting that as well too. So much more than just person, mind, and brain, it's other processes. Contemporary psychologists who say, hey, you work with individuals. You could be a clinical therapist, right? A psychoanalyst. You can work with groups, right? You can do marriage and family therapy. Husband and wife may bring in children too, right? They may work with a cultural group, family, having issues with the kid, get everybody together. Or you can work with entire communities, understand the psychology of entire groups of people, right? Because you're like, hey, besides individual minds, this collective group might have their own unique behaviors, but they're all kind of the same. They kind of think the same, right? In some way, and behave the same. Right, so you're like, hey, I can bring a wide range of skills to a wide range of challenges. Where do psychologists work? Government, the VA, medical centers, business, not-for-profits, you say organizational psychologists. Universities, you could teach, do research, right? Schools, right? Anyone had high school counselors? You go to? Okay. Right, so it's like you could do high school counseling, or you could be independent practice, right? And the other independent clinical practice. All right, one thing interesting about field psychology, it does require rigorous scientific application, right? So much so that we actually have in the university system want people to write in APA format. Anyone ever heard of APA? No? Right? You're like, hey, there's a system, a way of writing, including references, in-text citations, the way you compose, and that's APA, stands for American Psychological Association, right? So psychologists really adapted really kind of progressed the field of scientific research, so much that most colleges require APA writing for that. So let me say there's a commitment to rigorous scientific methods, and we'll talk about how that all looks. Application to these methods to questions about behavior, right? So it's like, hey, I want to do some psychological research. Well, it just starts off with an interesting question. Here's one. Who experiences more mood challenges on social media? Those who post consistently and actually engage, or those who just kind of scroll and observe? Who do you think has more issues with depression, mood issues, etc.? What do you think? Yeah. Teenagers. But between two camps, those who actively post, right? Stories, reels, right? Funny stuff, blah, blah, blah. Or those people like, I don't really do nothing but just watch. I just What do you think
I
have
think
more?
the people actively post because I even said this in my head. You have to keep posting stuff to keep people engaged. And a lot of those people get paid from social media. So if they're not entertaining their audience enough, that means the lower they get paid. So they have to do the most outrageous things to get the most likes, to get the most views, to get all this attention so they can have enough money. But for the viewer who's looking on it, engaging, like, oh no, I could never do that. But for the person who's actually doing it, they're doing it for the money. They want to they do stuff to make you like, what is you talking about? They want you to comment, they want you to like, they want you to repost it because they make money off it.
Gotcha.
It's
Right, and that's,
outrageous.
yeah, and that's understandable, right? You would think, hey, social media influencers, especially, they're monetizing their efforts, right, to get more likes, subscribes, and shares. Probably do have more stress to kind of keep producing content, whether it's irrelevant content or irrelevant content, interesting, not interesting. But interesting enough, the people who observe have been researched and found that they have more mood issues along with depression. Because they're watching other people's lives unfold without having any skin in the game. It's like just going to the games constantly but never becoming an athlete that participates, right? So, because we're watching everybody's wonderful lives unfold, right? IG, everyone's here, exotic place, and it makes us feel very low about ourselves. And just swing our moods, right? Constantly thinking, am I good enough? I should be doing what they're doing. I want to be like my favorite social media influencers, right? So yeah, those could be questions, like just basic interesting questions, right? About behavior, thinking process, therapies to reduce psychological stress. All right, now remember I told you that it comes primarily from Western thought. Western thought was the white European men, right? We had these great kind of questions that they posited, brought over to the United States, right? We know that primarily was taken over, right, by the Europeans. But like, well, how does that include everybody else later on? Because we're pretty multicultural and diverse now. Does psychology include people from Africa, people from East Asia, right? Indigenous populations, Aborigines, right? All these different things. So now we're kind of in a dynamic changing era of psychology. Because like originally, it did not include a lot of us, right? People who were maybe of minority groups. Primarily it was focused on middle to upper class people of European descent, right? Because other parts of the world says, hey, we actually view this psychology thing, we don't even agree with it. We don't even accept it. Like, we may come from a culture, it's like there's something completely different. And why would that be? Well, most of the world is either collectivistic or individualistic. So some of us in this class may come from a collectivistic culture. You're like, well, what's kind of involved with collectivistic culture? Well, in a collectivistic culture, the group is more important than the individual. So in collectivistic culture, if one may say, hey, I'm sad, I'm depressed, the group will say the reason why you're sad or depressed is because you've deviated from the group. You're trying to be too much on your own. You're trying to be too much of an individual. That's why you have an issue. Come back to the group and create harmony within the group and you'll be fine. In the United States, we say, well, we're kind of individualistic, right? Which means that we have a preference to be our best selves as an individual, that we think the individual is more important than the group, that you're a very strong ego, you're trying to live your best life, achieve your individual greatness in some way. Brings its own challenges. Because we notice people who have a hyper sort of awareness to self have more issues with anxiety, stress, depression, because you're too much focused on something. Hence why mental health is so big in the U.S., particularly just in the West in general. because of the dynamic that we live in an individualistic culture, which means that you're more important than the group, or you think you're more important than the group. And that creates issues in your life, right? So now we're trying to blend the two. How does it work with people from collectivistic cultures and individualistic? So think, any of you ever had any situations where, think of from your cultural groups, and maybe your parents or your grandparents had issues with the like, you're doing something much more different that we're comfortable with from our tradition, our history, our culture. Anyone ever had any of those situations that you could think of? And maybe they feel that maybe you're, potentially becoming too Americanized or something. Like that could be some issues in your life. Anyone? Right? So maybe you have, right? You're like, hey, you know what? You may come from a very collectivistic culture versus people who are, they've been here forever. Families been here forever. Might be individualistic to begin with. All right, we'll talk about the scientific methods, but kind of leave a lot of that maybe for next class. So we just want to get kind of to the interesting part, all right? Personality. We'll also discuss personality in this class, which I know is much more of the interesting part of psychology you have to deal with, right? So we're all a multitude of different personalities. But here in our field, we say we could kind of put that into 5 easy dimensions, right? Here they give an acronym called OCEAN, and this deals with personality traits, dimension of personality traits. So OCEAN's an acronym for openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. So if you were to use this model of OCEAN and you were to meet someone, let's say a couple times you met them, you could kind of determine and predict how their behavior is going to be moving forward, right? You can kind of predict that. And remember we said with the field of psychology, not everything is 100% empirical, which means that a lot of things, we're just talking about the bell curve, the general population, the general population in any kind of dimension that we're talking about, right? Because we want to be able to predict behavior and also describe behavior, but we can't say it applies to each and every person. There's always people on the outliers. But for the most part, we can kind of generalize predictive behavior using the OCEAN model for personality, right? So we say, hey, O, openness, right? O is openness. Openness involves an individual's proclivity for new experiences, new ideas, new concepts. So who here feel that they're relatively an open personality? That you are open to new experiences, new ideas? You feel like you're high in openness, moderate?
I would say moderate because I get nervous sometimes, but when I feel comfortable, I'm able to express.
Gotcha. Okay, anyone else? You feel that you're high or kind of moderate?
I think kind of moderate as well.
Okay. In what way? Like, do you feel that you always have to try new things or meet new people, or you're even open to new ideas and concepts about life or how people think or live in general?
Yeah, I like to learn about different cultures as well as try new things.
Okay. All right, so look, we would say, hey, those who are high in openness, quite comfortable with new experiences, new ideas, new people. Those low, we might meet someone low and say, they don't want to meet new people. They may be somewhat biased or prejudiced, right? They don't want to try new experiences. They prefer what they normally are used to, right? And then conscientiousness. Conscientiousness is kind of awareness of self and others, awareness of people's emotions, aware of your own emotions. You'll hear people kind of describe their own personalities, what they like, what they dislike, and are very expressive with it. You could say someone could be high on conscientiousness or low on conscientiousness. Extroversion. Do I have any introverts in the class? Someone who perceives that they're introverted. Do you have any extroverts in the class? Someone who perceives that they're extroverted.
Yeah.
You feel that you're extroverted? Do you feel that you're extroverted? All right, so like extroversion. We say, hey, you can be high or low. If you're low, we kind of describe it as introvert, but no one's completely an introvert. Hence why we call it extroversion itself as a dimension. Right, extroversion is usually people who are more energetic in groups, more creative, do their best thinking, they're more productive and more happy within group situations. So for example, we can kind of relate it to charging up your phone, a phone battery. An extroverted person will charge their battery faster when they're in social groups than if they were alone at home by themselves. Introverted person would be the opposite. They would be more energetic and charged and do better thinking, right? And be in a better position when they're alone. So when they go and have to interact with other people, either by force or some social arrangement, their battery depletes, right? So we can kind of relate that to a battery. So you're like, hey, that's a good way to describe whether you're extrovert or introvert. Agreeableness. We know that women tend to be higher on scales of agreeability than men, right? Because women have a preference for social harmony, so they prefer that the group has peace, right? Whether it would be logical or not, right? Whereas men tend to be more disagreeable, right? Hence why men are more highly populated in the prison system, because they disagree with the laws, the rules, and disagree with each other. Usually it leads to physical violence, death, anything of the sort, right? Because men, for them, primarily, if 1 + 1 doesn't equal 2, they don't care about the social harmony, right? They'll disagree, and they'll have to resolve that, right? So agreeability, and even women, when it comes to, like, say, political things, are more high on agreeability. Trait neuroticism, right? Neuroticism involves kind of negative thinking for future events. Have you ever met anyone who's always negative?
Yes.
What kind of stuff do they say? If you even tell them about what you're doing, what you're thinking about doing, things you're gonna be involved in, what kind of responses would you get?
For the same question, you met somebody who you said is always down. When you meet somebody who's down, they're basically putting out their problems onto you. So like whatever anger they have inside themselves, they're putting it onto you basically.
Yeah.
Because they don't know how to mentally control how they feel.
Yeah. Right, so say trait neurotic people are negative minded to future events. So you could say like, hey, I'm thinking about going to college. I mean, should you really go? It's expensive. Maybe you should get a job. Hey, I'm gonna go take a cool trip to a cool island somewhere. What if the plane crashes? Right? Isn't that expensive? You know, people are always negative minded about something that could potentially happen, right? So those people won't even take risks, right? And life's all about risk, right? They're not very positive people to be around. They don't really motivate others. So neurotic people. So either those people could be extremely positive and risky, right? And they could be low on neurotic, or they could be high, very negative minded towards future events. They're always embracing for the worst, right? Expecting the worst, because the worst will calm them, right? So if the worst happens, they feel that they've already can expect it in some way, and they feel more comfortable with that. Okay, and another thing too, right? We'll talk about sensation and perception. Don't worry about this, because actually these slides are coming from another textbook. Another part we'll talk about is the biological systems in the class. So we'll talk about receptors in the eyes, hormones or chemical processes within the brain and how that affects behavior, thinking, feelings, what have you, right? Other anatomical systems, but even sensation and perception. How do we sense versus how do we interpret that information and how we kind of perceive what's going on? Tricky, because we say most of the time our perceptions are off. They don't reflect maybe some sort of intrinsic reality, like some absolute reality, because they're just perceptions, right? But they have a reason. Nature gave us perceptions for adaptation and survival, right, through evolution. So let me ask you, when it comes to perception versus the reality, absolute reality, can letters have a color? Wouldn't even make sense. Like a letter's a letter. What does that have to do with color? So let me ask you, what is the color of the letter A? The color of the letter A. What color is in your mind?
Black.
That's what pops in your mind? Red? Red? What do you think? Blue? Red. Red. Right? Once again, we say, how can a letter have a color? It can't. But usually it's red. And why would that be? Why would we perceive the letter A as red? Because A is for apple.
I was just thinking about the regular alphabet. If I said that.
Right? And so A is for apple and apples are red. They're not red. Apples are green, go to the grocery store. They're not all red, right? So you're like, hey, so sometimes our perceptions of things are intrinsically off base. You're like, that has no basis in reality. That's just how I perceive it. Right? So another example would be, what color is the sun? Yellow. Right? What color is the sun?
It's a mix. Yellow and orange.
Yellow is orange.
Color is orange.
What color is the stars in the night sky? White?
White.
Sun is a star. Sun is white. Right? So we say sometimes we perceive the sun as yellowish orange. Sun's no different than any other star in the night sky. That's just a perception based on the spectrum of light that we're seeing, scattering of particles in the atmosphere. But we to see it for what it really is, not what we like. Right? So like sometimes perception is different than absolute reality. Right? So things we have to think about. Like, that becomes very interesting. Even when we think about other things. Like, are we just perceiving that, or is that an absolute reality of fact? Things like the concept of time, right? Your mind has been programmed that time is linear. Today, tomorrow, New Year's Eve, birthday, a new year. You've been programmed, right? Time is not linear. It just goes woven in the fabric of what we know as space-time. Distances and curvature of the universe, et cetera, et cetera. Right? It has no absolute kind of basis in fact. Right? All right. And what do we talk about too? Functions of the brain. This will be a big one. Like I said, we'll kind of cover different parts. So maybe 1 week we'll talk about the eye and how that all works and how we perceive the receptors. Right? A little bit of tidbit. Females generally have more cones in their eyes than rods. And cones are used for color receptors. right? So sometimes if your boy, you know, be telling your boyfriend like, hey, what color do you think, what shade of pink do you think this is? And he's like, I can't see what you're talking about. It's pink. I'm like, yeah, but it's kind of like a different rosy pink. Like physically, he cannot see the same what you see, the different shades of that color. Right? Men tend to have more rods, which are more for contrast, black and white, kind of for night vision, which is better. That makes sense. You have to hunt, you have to kill, you have to protect. And you should be more aware of things that can pop out in the nighttime, contrast of movement, shades, et cetera, right? So we'll even talk about things like that, right? So here we're talking functions of the brain. Quickly, we can kind of go through this. All right, here's our brain. And our brain has lobes, right? Our brain has lobes. And we'll just kind of describe lobes as regions that have kind of particular functions associated with similar groups of things, right? Okay, so we said, hey, remember that alien brain I talked about earlier, right? Involves things that happen automatic. Let me ask you, are you thinking about breathing right now?
No, you just do.
Are you thinking about your heartbeat? Are you thinking about when you go to the bathroom, or it just happens?
Sometimes.
Yes.
Well, I mean, you think about it when you feel there's a need, right?
Oh.
Right? So you're not thinking about the process, but when it happens. When you're walking, are you thinking about walking?
Yeah.
Right? When you're driving, do you forget that you're driving and you decide to text and listen to radio? Right? Automatic processes, things that happen automatic, which means, once again, there's that alien brain, or what we call the unconscious mind. So that starts at the base, right? So people kind of call it whatever, our most oldest part of the brain, because we say we have this in similarities to lizards, right? Amphibians, et cetera, et cetera. And it's really just to have the systems for you to be able to live, for it to breathe, regulate blood pressure, heartbeat, and have some form of consciousness. And it happens at the brain stem, right? Regulates body temperature, digestion, right? Automatic digestion. You don't think about it. Swallow. You don't think about it. Sleep. You're not thinking about it. It just happens. Stuff that happens. It happens at the brain stem. A little bit beyond that, a little bit above that, we have the cerebellum. Balance, coordination, fine muscle control. So we would say, hey, you know, if we look at this from the bottom up, we can start to see why human beings are a little bit more complex and different than other animals when it comes to just survival. Because remember, primarily, you are here for survival. Nature does not care what you think. You have a bunch of wonderful thoughts about all these accomplishments, stuff you want to do. Nature could care less, right? Nature's invisible, but nature's a program. So nature said, what is critical for you to have in your being in order for you to continue the species going, right? So we don't go extinct. Right? At the last part, which we'll talk about with the prefrontal cortex, that's really what separates human beings, right? Build ships, bridges, roads, schools, yada yada, technology, blah blah blah, right? Social. All right, so moving above. All right, we got the cerebellum. Balance, coordination, fine muscle control. Important, right? We need to be able to walk and not fall over, right? We need to be able to move in order to eat, pick up things. Important. We say, okay, this seems to be the most base of survival that nature gave us, the brainstem. The cerebellum will probably be next level, right? Be able to walk around, move, and do stuff in some coordinated way. There used to be a very famous actor, Christopher Reeves. He played Superman originally, right? Like in the 1980s. Very popular. He played in a bunch of other movies too. And he had an accident in which he fell off his horse. He was riding a horse, and he fell off and hit his head and made damage to here, this area, between the cerebellum and the brainstem. So if you damaged this part in some way, most likely you'll die quickly. Why? He had to be on a machine to where he had to think about breathing because of his damage to this part of his body, right? And so life-changing. Now you might be able to damage some of this stuff. You'll still live. You might have some issues with reading or memory. But if you damage something here, and now you can't regulate blood pressure automatically, you can't breathe automatically, you might need some sort of assistance to the heart because it's not pumping automatically. Most likely you're gonna die. Much quicker than other parts of the brain. Right? Okay, next we got the occipital lobe. Dealing with the eye and vision. Human beings are primarily visual. We have the most receptors of any part of our body in the eye. Right? The eye is the most important part of our being. Right? It gives you, I would say, the most information. You get the most information received from the environment through the eye. So it's no surprise that the occipital lobe would be critically important and also very large. Right? So it deals with vision, visual reception, and also the ability to interpret what you see. Right? Color, depth, right? Movement, etc., etc. All right, above that, we have the parietal lobe, knowing right from left. The brain has two hemispheres, right? And what's interesting is that the left part of the brain controls usually the right part of the body. The right part of the brain controls the left part of the body, right? And in the middle, they synthesize. Right? So if you have issues on this part of the brain, you might have issues moving this part of the body. This part of the brain, this part of the body, right? Well, up two hemispheres, right? Well, we say, hey, the parietal lobe, knowing right from left, important. Sensation, right? Touching, right? How to sense different things, tasting, reading, body orientation, and sensory discrimination, right? Knowing the difference between two different senses, like taste and smell, how to interpret those separately, right? All right, temporal lobe, right? Off to the sides, right? Around your temporal areas. Temporal lobe involves understanding of language, how you interpret language, behavior, memory, and also hearing. Really important stuff here, right? So you have some damage to temporal lobe, might have some issues with your memory, ability to hear, and also ability to understand language. Makes sense because hearing involves language. Language involves hearing, and all of that involves memory. Right? You memorize, if you're bilingual, you memorize, quickly, maybe the new language you learn. Whether you natively spoke Spanish, you have to memorize English, right? With your continued use of it, or vice versa. And then frontal lobe. Frontal lobe controls movement, thinking initiation, reasoning and judgment, emotional behavior, memory, and also speaking. And at the front we have the prefrontal cortex, right? Other animals have a prefrontal cortex. It's not as large, not as dense, not as complicated as ours. We have the most complicated one. And we say that's high-level executive functioning. How to rationalize, reason, produce logic. Right? It's necessary if you're doing math, if you're doing science, if you're doing things that require rigorous logical views. So for your prefrontal cortex, it's still developing. Hence why we have different court systems and different penal systems for youth, adolescent, and adults, right? Because it can be used in court to say your brain is actually physically still developing. It's not completely done. So what age do you think this usually stops, where your brain is completely done?
Oh, On the normal scale for it though, it says it stops at 21. But I personally think your brain doesn't stop developing until like the afterlife. Because,
Okay.
and I say that because something you feel like you all grown when you're 21, but it's other things that could be happening after you turn 21. If that makes sense. Like you can learn new things, you can change new things because at 21 is that legal age. Like yeah, you can do whatever you want basically, but at the same time, some people take advantage of it and use it in a negative way, or sometimes people turn it into a good positive way.
Yeah, those are good points, right? Your prefrontal cortex, 21 is kind of a good age where, you know, they kind of assess that it stopped. It could go as far as like 27. Depends, right? Depends on a lot of things, environmental factors, genetics, et cetera, et cetera. So maybe between the ages of say 21 and 27. Right? But on average, I say 25. On average, maybe about the age of 25 is when you would think someone's brain. Now you're right though, in terms of your brain evolving, you're gonna constantly learn, have new experiences, neuroplasticity. You change environment, your brain's gonna adapt, learn new things, figure out how to move through this system and this environment, and that continues on through life. So yeah, you're right, it doesn't, your brain doesn't stop evolving until death, right? For the most part. So you can always use that kind of as an excuse to your parents, right? Like, oh man, I don't like your poor decision making. Like, mom, dad, guess what? My brain is actually still in process. It's still being formed. So
That's
something
what my
you
brain
like,
is.
yeah, you can use that, right? Okay. Any questions? Moving along. Now these slides are from another book, so I'm gonna have the correct ones on Thursday, but these are a little bit kind of going off into different paths. All right, here's some research at the brain level, right? They're just kind of thrown out there. Brain activity using brain imaging methods, right? So but remember psychology say, man, this field has so many different components. One, we get to study behavior, right? We can't study thoughts, right? Thoughts have to translate into behavior to be observable. But we also even have technology. We use fMRI, MRI, right? All sorts of different imaging techniques to look inside the brain and see activity, parts that kind of light up when certain activities are happening. Right, so we're like, hey, using different imaging methods, findings suggest that stereotypes influence performance and the brain, right? It means that human beings have a natural proclivity to stereotype all sorts of situations, people, what have you, and that will ultimately influence performance. In women who do not hear the stereotype information, right? Let's go back and see what was the information they were referring to. Okay, they didn't give it. The most active brain regions were those useful for solving math problems. Women who heard the stereotype-related information showed increased activity in the brain region involved in the production of emotional experiences, right? So you're like, hey, if we tend to stereotype any given situation, right? Meaning that we categorize it through just our limited experiences and say, okay, I kind of know what this is about. Usually that has an emotional effect to us to some degree, right? And it will kind of impact how you either express or solve problems, right? Usually in a negative way, right? Because we say emotions are not reliable for solving logical problems, such as math, right? Because math doesn't care about what you feel about it. It only cares about high-level functions of logic with rules that can be applied to certain given situations. Right. We'll also talk about next class other systems, such as the emotional system, the limbic system, and some hormone functions, and how that all kind of impacts our behaviors. All right. Is that the correct time, 3:15? What time is it? All right, any questions before we get out of here? All right, everyone, we will pick this back up on Thursday. Hope you have a great day, and I'll see you then.